Welcome everybody to 52 Living Ideas. This is the Bucky Inspired series that we do in collaboration with Greater Philadelphia Thinking Society. And I am honored here to have Stephen Bao, and he's going to be talking about a mental model that allows you to think of an individual in an integrated way. So with that, I'm just going to hand it over to Stephen to explain. Stephen.
Thank you very much, Shrikant. And I do want to express some appreciation to Maritza as well, just for inviting me to participate in the 52 Living Ideas. And it's so amazing to be part of this series, the Bucky Inspired series, because I've been so inspired by Buckminster Fuller, especially over the last few years. So just to give you a little bit of a background on who I am and what I'm up to, I've been a designer for over 30 years, so working professionally since 1988, and it's been an interesting ride, just being able to try to keep up with the technologies as everything's changing. I went from designing everything based on training that I was given in college, doing everything by hand. Everything was very manual, analog. And as soon as I got into working as a designer, I noticed there were changes happening very quickly. At that time, things were changing to digital production. And in that process, I picked up a computer and some manuals and started to learn. And that's really driven my process over the years of really trying to keep up with all the changes and trying to maintain a relevant career over those years. But maybe things kind of maybe fell off the tracks a little bit over the last decade. And that's been an interesting journey. I would say over the past decade, I left a web agency and have been trying a lot of different things, from teaching at a university to running my own freelance web design and development business, to actually founding a company called the Builders Collective. Now, it doesn't amount to much other than just a name that I run by, but behind that is a brand or a visual identity that I was trying to build to connect to how do I actually be more integrated with the living systems of the planet and actually shift my work towards working for the betterment of myself, of my community, and for the planet as a whole. And at the time, I was very unfamiliar with Buckminster Fuller, maybe very tangentially aware through that famous quote, you can't fight the existing systems, but you can create a new model that makes the old models obsolete. Slightly paraphrased, I'm sure. But that phrase in particular was very inspiring to me, and that might give you a little bit of an intro to what I'm going to show you today. So it's a little bit of a story of where I've come from, and then how my work has transitioned over that time. From what I've been noticing in the industry has been this shift from creating physical artifacts in design production, kind of manufacturing mode, to actually recognizing what we're doing is creating entire social systems, and maybe using digital platforms to be able to do that. But when I became acquainted with what Bucky was up to, the word ephemeralization came to mind. This is the process we're in, is actually the ephemeralization of design, from designing the physical things to actually going, well, those those processes are actually being applied to the way we interact in a collective sense. So I'm just going to start my screen share now and switch to Chrome, bring up the right slides. All right. So a mental model for a living being, that's kind of a presumptuous thing to even try. But that's coming out of this sense that we're in these systemic crises, multiple systemic crises from the micro to the macro. So from the biological, personal, social, economic, political, to the ecological. And it's with this perspective that I joined the Design Science Studio. And the aspiration was to create change by transcending the helplessness of the individual, by embracing the culture of the collective. And the language that I was coming up with in a TrimTab space camp that was being offered by the Buckminster Fuller Institute, I was offering this project, a creative, collaborative, self-organizing learning community. And that was my lengthy way of just referring to a holobiont. I think David McConville brought that up early in the courses, the TrimTab Space Camp courses. So the Builders Collective, BLDRS, is the company that I came up with. What this refers to is building leaders to design a resilient society. Also, it's builders without any vowels. But when I found that there's a domain name, bldrs.co, available, I thought, oh, I can use that for my short URL. So this is inspired by the Bauhaus, a school that was started in 1919 by Walter Gropius in Weimar, Germany. And you might notice that my aesthetic, this is one of the mental models that I came up with at the end of 1919. I'm sorry, 2019, 100 years later after the Bauhaus was born. That is drawing on the primary colors and geometries that inspired the Bauhaus. It was very boxy, but I was trying to break out of those boxes and explore what it might mean to look at a model that was cyclical, and using the primary colors of yellow, blue, and red, I modified it a little bit, and I'm using colors drawn from process colors in print production. So cyan, magenta, yellow, and black become my color palette. And as I was exploring the idea of love as a way to communicate to a culture, my earlier aspirations in my career were to explore maybe magazine production and design would be what I would get into. And how would I organize all of these categories of information? And a magazine is like a storehouse of knowledge. That's what magazine means. So, these days magazines are used for storing other things like bullets. A magazine gets put into a gun, for example. But the original idea was a storehouse of ideas, and so what I was exploring was, how do I integrate going to Maslow's hierarchy of needs, the basic necessities of human life, food, clothing, and shelter. And once we have those basic needs met, we can start getting into art and music and culture and explore all of these other factors of life. And then we can reach the transcendent at the bottom here, faith, hope, and love, drawing from my Christian background, because that was what I was born into. And it has really informed the way I think about ideas in terms of design and trinities and triads and triangles. So the Christian concept of Trinity became a kind of guiding light, you could say, for the way I was exploring how these ideas intersected with design and integrating metaphysics in maybe a more subtle way, because I'm trying to interact in the business world. So what I came up with for the Builders Collective was this kind of primary set of ideas to imagine, to design, and to build. And that was how we would create a way to build leaders to design a resilient society. And so the idea was to focus on the earth as a whole, and then find ways that these universal patterns of geometry actually fit into the whole. And so I built a whole brand, as you can see, around these primary colors and grid systems and shapes and typography, trying to imagine, if I was going to create my ideal organization, what would it look like? And so the idea was to focus on resilience, designed for resilience, exploring how humans imagine, design, and build the future together. And so rather than this focus on IDEO as a major design organization focuses on human-centered design. And in that school, it's about what is desirable, what is feasible, what is viable. So it meets the human need. It's technologically feasible. And you can build a viable business around this product, whatever it is you're designing. But the Builders Collective for me was intended to be a movement to build these leaders to design a resilient society using this human-centered design to create engaging experiences through art, design, social change, and social architecture. So social architecture I'll get into a little bit, but so I started building websites around these ideas to try to build an ecosystem to be part of this conversation. And this is the project that I actually brought into the design science studio. So the idea was, how do we create this collective organization that then draws from the inspiration of the Bauhaus, which was created in a moment of crisis after the end of World War I. And the idea was to bring together a number of individuals to create a collective around the idea of art, being able to change the way we interact as a society, building our art and architecture and the living systems that humans use from the ground up. So for me, taking that idea into the present, into this current context, it was rethinking that architecture. Modernism kind of grew out of the innovations of the Bauhaus, and they were exported because the Bauhaus was dealing with a crisis of as the school carried on for about 14 years until it was shut down by the Nazis. And at that time, there was a diaspora. The ideas spread around the world because the Nazis were shutting down the school, and the students and faculty needed somewhere to go. So a large number of them went to the United States, but many areas around the world. And that's how the architecture of modernism spread in a very sort of a migratory way around the world through all that crisis that was going on then. So social architecture, for me, is a way of focusing on the metaphysics. And when I talk about metaphysics, it's about what is beyond what we can quantify and measure. And that usually is within the humanities, in the realm of how we design our personal well-being, our social systems, our economic systems, and our political systems. And so the physical world has been facing this biological and ecological crisis. And what I was noticing was that the Earth has the ability to regenerate on its own. Learning in the design science studio from people like Lynn Margulis, that there's the Gaia hypothesis. The Earth is a holobiont. It's a self-regulating system, and it will take care of itself if we let it. And so we have this design challenge, really, to figure out how do we coordinate our actions in recognition of that reality that Earth is self-regulating, and what is our role as human beings in that? But also the challenges that we're facing are these metaphysical challenges of disconnection and distraction and disinformation in our social environment and our information ecology. It's polluted because of a corporate monopoly over public discourse. And so, if we are going to take some advice from George Monbiot, to create a politics of belonging, we need to organize. And how would we organize? Around awareness, empathy, and understanding. So these are the metaphysical challenges of our systemic design problem. And they're both personal and collective. So the transformation will take place through a redesign of our personal habits and our information ecology. By reimagining our social architecture, we can reshape our metaphysical reality, our habits, which will reform our digital systems and physical architecture. We must give ourselves permission to redesign our social systems to rebuild a regenerative world. And so I began to focus on, how do I build community? And this is not something like I had a lot of experience with as a very shy, introverted artist. This was the thing that I was feeling like was my mission in life. It was like a calling, a divine calling, but I had no idea how I was going to fulfill it. But over the last few years, what has been happening is I've been helping out in integrating with the communities that are growing out of the Buckminster Fuller Institute and the Design Science Studio. So World Weavers is a meeting that I host every 2 weeks. It started out with an inspiration from Tony Patrick, who was instructing the Trim Tab Space Camp participants around the ideas of world building and backcasting. How do we create the futures that we want? Well, we envision those and then kind of figure out what steps were needed to get to that kind of vision, and then map that out in a form of backcasting. So within the design science studio, I was integrating the concept of the builders collective. And then what I actually realized was, well, the design science studio really became like the new Bauhaus, the new Agora, the place where during the pandemic, when everyone was suffering from agoraphobia, the idea of going back to the Agora in Athens, that deliberative body in that nascent democracy of the city of Athens, how could we reframe that for our current context? So the Builders Collective, the Design Science Studio, were really exploring that idea of how do we become that deliberative body who has all of these technologies and this ability to connect across the world in ways that we haven't been able to before. And so it felt like this is our moment. The design science decade that Buckminster Fuller had envisioned between 1965 and 1975 could now be reinstantiated from the year 2020 forward. And so out of that integration and collective play came this idea of the Inner and Outer Architecture Institute when Javier Sanosian was coming to the Design Science Studio to explore organic architecture. Just amazing inspiration. And so this idea of being in conversation, I'm inspired by this quote by Eric Holthaus: "If words make worlds, then we urgently need to tell a new story about the climate crisis. Here's one vision of what it could look and feel like to radically, collectively take action." And so how would we do that? Building the community around making the connections, collecting the narratives, documenting the library, drawing the map, and creating the culture. That was kind of the vision we had. My partner and I, Brad Jarvis and myself in the Builders Collective, were thinking, well, I guess what we're doing here is documenting a community into existence. And the social architecture is actually around building personal resilience, social influence, economic capacity, political agency, and ecological harmony. Because the built environment is an extension of who we are, who we aspire to be as a group of human beings, living and working in the spaces that we share in common. When we build, we project our aspirations into the future. What we build then shapes us into who we will become. So in the Design Science Studio, the aspiration was art and design for a regenerative future that works for 100% of life. And following this plan laid out by Buckminster Fuller of reconciliation, restoration, resilience, regeneration, and rejoicing through commitment, capital transfer, coming together, celebration, and circularity. So that was the whole idea of the Builders Collective, exploring how we imagine, design, and build the future together. And the focus on resilience. What is resilience? What is the role of the designer? How can we gain permission to ask better questions or to think about the bigger picture? How can we better understand the stories we tell ourselves and perhaps tell better stories? How do we prototype for resilience? So on. So now we get to metaphysical gravity. This is one of the projects that I brought into the Living Systems Collaboratory. So a navigation system for spaceship Earth. And, if anyone knows anything about Buckminster Fuller, you'll recognize that metaphysical gravity is love, or that's the way he stated it in poetic form. Love is metaphysical gravity. And so that's what I was exploring through these different scales of attention, through this exploration of an interface that was circular, exploring how things grow from the center outward, and create these networks rather than hierarchies of competition, networks of collaboration as a holobiont. And so, starting at the molecular level, growing to the cellular level, growing to the networks around the Earth, and then noticing like these similar patterns that are happening at the scale of a galaxy in the way these bodies are interacting, and how can we apply that to our stories about who we are and what we're here to do. So here we get back to, you know, the crisis of empire. We are in this hierarchical and patriarchal system of status, wealth, and power. And what I discovered was that there was this avenue to explore the sacred feminine, the divine spirit animating and indwelling all of creation. So I'm getting more into the metaphysical language because that's where things got personal. I was facing a crisis within my own life where my father-in-law passed away of COVID. And I needed to drop everything in the design science studio to start going through this process of fulfilling the will of my father-in-law as executor of his will. And out of that process, we gained some financial freedom, and this allowed me to go back into the design science studio. And I met a woman named Veronica Anderson, and she helped me to explore a different way of noticing tensegrity within myself, the tension, compression, and precession that was creating a different way of seeing and understanding myself in a sense of integration of the feminine and masculine within myself. And this was the ensoulment process that Veronica Anderson was taking me through: meditation, transformation, and mission. But I'm just reframing mission as a kind of soul integration. And so if you're curious about the process that I went through, Veronica is actually offering a workshop, a series of workshops through the Vitra Academy, through the Vision Train. And if you want to, you can look this up at vitra.academy/creative-empowerment. So my interaction with Veronica started bringing about a different way of seeing my world in terms of how do I model what's going on inside myself. And I was noticing the interactions between mind, heart, and body, and time, energy, and matter. And I started to create images within my mindfulness practice that I was learning through the ensoulment process. It was guided by an introduction to Buddhist philosophy and meditation practices. And some of that process that I was going through of letting go of this internalized patriarchy that was kind of breaking down some relationships in my personal life, there was a way of reintegrating through different ways of seeing myself. And I, using my skills as a designer, I started to build these models of how do I see myself. But as we were reaching the end of cohort 2 of the Design Science Studio, I was being asked to create a way of synthesizing some of the design sprints that we were going through as about 90 artists of the 144 people who had applied to become part of the design science studio. A small number of those would come together for weekend design sprints, and what came out of that was this cooperating manual for being human, principles for collaboration. And so I created a simple diagram that showed these basic collaboration principles and how they connected to the mental model of what it means to be human. So having a heart, a mind, and a body connected to the senses. Jesse James Garrett goes over these ideas in a talk that he gave back in probably 2013 to some UX designers in Portugal. And so he was recognizing that there are these 4 different aspects of experience: perception, cognition, emotion, and action, which correspond to senses, mind, heart, and body. And out of this schematic, I started to, well, it was more like a north, south, east, west kind of perspective that he was showing these items in. But drawing from Bucky's geometry, I started to think about, well, how is this actually a tetrahedral shape? And what is the inner architecture of our inner experience? So connecting will, vision, and effort with intuition, intention, and interbeing, I could also interact with the senses here, but also give a vision of what intellectual integrity might look like, or emotional integrity, or physical integrity, as we're bringing in the 12 systems of the body into what it means to have individual physical integrity as a living being. But collectively, it also has a way of connecting to Kate Raworth's donut economics and moving things around a little bit to align with the living systems of the body. There was some striking correspondence here that then I could also connect to what are the physical integrity of the global, or the planetary systems. And what I ended up with was this kind of molecule, which for me was just like a kind of lightning bolt or eureka moment for me of like, this is amazing. Like to see all of this connecting through kind of this chromatic circular understanding of the color wheel that came out of the Bauhaus through Johann Itten. And what I ended up doing was creating more of a linear view of this, so it's easier to read. So you can see the physics and the being and the integrity and the senses and the thoughts, emotions, living systems, social systems, earth systems, all integrating across this entire spectrum. And so more recently, I've been exploring, well, how do I make this even simpler? What is a mental model for a living being if what I'm doing is trying to connect to the earth? And if I imagine the earth as Gaia, as a living being that is self-organizing, self-sustaining, and self-regulating, and if I have the ability to interact with that kind of perception that is going on within these physical systems that are going on, like how would that actually be happening? And so this is the model that I came up with, was recognizing that body, mind, and heart are interacting with time, energy, and matter. And it's the connections that are happening in between mind and body, for example. They're connecting to time through the senses, and the mind and heart are connecting to energy through the spirit. Heart and body are connecting to matter through the soul. This became for me a really interesting way of thinking about Buckminster Fuller's tensegrity as this inner and outer interaction that's going on within the inner tetrahedron and the outer sphere, where every living being is interacting at the spherical level, but there's this inner sense that has these points of contact with the outer world through the mind, heart, and body. So this becomes life's interface for insight. And the way I came to this realization was actually going to the scale of the solar system and then mapping it out in terms of a sine wave, showing me where the full moon and the new moon cycles would be going in and out, and taking that kind of wave idea from Buckminster Fuller of, everything has this in and outness, and there are no straight lines. Everything is circular, elliptical, or moving in a wave. There are no straight lines to infinity. Space is curved. And so this Kairos calendar is basically starting at the bottom at the winter solstice and then moving in the counterclockwise direction that we would be able to see the orbit of the Earth from the northern perspective above the sun. And so it was interesting how it created this iris effect. And as I explore this in terms of universal principles and connecting it to how we're moving around the sun, it also seemed to connect the colors energetically to the way the Earth is getting warmer and cooler through the cycles, and the colors give that sense of how the temperatures are even changing throughout the year. So this brought me back to the mental model for being human, and then applying it to, can I actually apply this to the Earth? And it's drawing from the days of creation in Genesis. So you'll notice there's day 1, day 2, day 3, day 4 as we go around the circumference of this circle, and goes to 6. And it's showing a kind of pattern that is somehow evident within the Christian narrative of creation that follows this pattern: light, water, land, or earth. And so it creates this spiraling cycle that from whatever is happening on the inside comes the architecture of how the whole is created. And I was breaking things down in terms of what is core to how the universe works, what is the inner experience, what is the outer expression of that essence, and then how can we apply that. These are the same terms, just provided in a linear grid format. And I won't get into them, but that brought me back to the original models that I was creating around how do all these triads interact. And when I start exploring how they can be expressed in hexagonal or circular relationships, then I start to form this meditation plan that connects to the life cycles and being able to sense my way around this challenge of sense making that we're in at the moment, and actually being in almost like more of a direct communication with the planet as I'm integrating with other living beings as well as human beings, going through these different sectors of my own experience, from the intellectual or physical, intellectual, emotional, energetic, temporal, and material. Everything is going in these circles from the bottom left around clockwise to the top left. And I was able to then actually recognize that this in and outness is happening on a daily cycle through the 7 days of the week. So starting with moon sort of as the inner, going out to Mars, back into Mercury, out to Jupiter, back into Venus, out to Saturn, back into the sun, and then we start the weekly cycle again. So that's a really just quick overview of how I got to these ideas. And here's some of the writing that I do on trimtab.substack.com, and some other publications that I'm exploring as well. So I can stop there and just welcome some interactions on, how these ideas are sitting with people, because really what I'm doing now is going through a process of validation and error correction, and what I'll bring into as we get into this is that this week I was exploring, how do I actually take this mental model and then put it into reality so that I can see how this tetrahedron is actually nested inside this sphere, the tetrahedron being the inner experience and the sphere being the outer interactions with the whole, that is creating this. What I didn't get into is the connections between the nodes, integrity, intuition, interbeing, intimacy, inspiration, and intention. That's the gravity pulling in. And then the radiation is what's happening at the collective level, the synergy, the synchronicity, the synthesis, the syntropy, and the synesthesia. So that's where I'll end my talk. And I'm excited to get into how this lands with people.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, Stephen. All right, folks. So I'm going to give priority to people who are familiar with Buckminster Fuller, familiar with these models. So we'll start with that, and then we will go to everybody else as well. So just go ahead and type an exclamation mark and go ahead, and we will go ahead and call on people. Give me just a second. I'm having problems with my chat here. Okay. All right. And I would request you to keep the comments a little bit shorter in the beginning. We'll have more because I want initial focus to be on asking questions to Stephen, to let him elaborate on his thoughts. And then we will have a separate, ability to comment on things at length. So initially, just keep your comments and questions brief so we can get many, many, many people involved in this conversation. Let Stephen elaborate on some of the things that you may not have, fully grasped, because it's a lot to take in. Okay, so I want that elaboration process first, and then we will have time for comments as well. All right, so we're going to start with Bill, George, and Jeannie. Bill. Oh, just a second. I have to unmute everybody. Hold on. Sorry about that. Go ahead, Bill.
My comment was going to be 3 brief suggestions, so I'll save it to the second round because I want to
Sure.
let people
Sounds good.
questions first.
Sounds good.
Thanks.
Thanks, Bill. Appreciate that. Next up is going to be George, followed by Jeannie. George.
Thanks. As a member of the board of the Buckminster Fuller Institute, I want to applaud Stephen's great work. Really beautiful, elegant, and to the point. Two comments. One, how do you self-correct a human that perhaps has parasites or has something else throwing his system out of disharmony in his assessment of his place in the universe? That's one. And two, how do we integrate the speed at which we learn into the solutions? How do we, as Bucky said, make the invisible visible so that we can move further towards aligning with the universe? So those are my comments. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you. And Stephen, please take your time to elaborate. You can add more things. This is a back and forth. We're trying to, explicate everything. Go ahead, Stephen.
Wow, challenging questions. There's going to be things that I'm probably just going to say, actually, I don't know. When it comes to error correcting and things that are actually going on within the body that need to be adjusted. Yeah, it feels like there's something of that going on within the body of the earth, right? And so there's this kind of parasitic relationship that human beings are having in relation to the earth because we've just happened to find an energy source that seems to solve all our problems of how do we scale our technologies as quickly as we might desire or want to, without recognizing that what we end up doing is in this model, these models that have created the mental model for human experience has a model for entropy and a model for syntropy. And that's what I'm trying to communicate with the model for entropy is if people look at it, they'll recognize, well, that's what we're doing right now. Correct. That awareness of what we're actually doing is reversing billions of years of syntropic processes of life. If we have that image in front of us and recognize, but well, then how would we do something differently? Well, then there's a model for that, and it would look very different because that model is actually working in reverse. And I actually started exploring the way I was orienting the models as well, so that, yeah, everything in the entropic model is working counterclockwise to communicate that the logic of the machine and separation and industrialization of the earth is actually an entropic model. If we wanted to create a syntropic model that is actually creating flourishing systems of life, then we would actually have to reverse the entire thing. And that would, I think, have to force people to slow down, to rest, to heal. I think that's the primary way of dealing with a parasite would be first to recognize that the parasite exists and it is being hosted within the body, and can that that parasite be transformed into a different behavior, symbiotic. This is what Lynn Margulis was exploring, was how these biological organisms are finding different ways of relating to each other so that they're not predatory and competitive primarily, but actually they're sharing information. So I think the major thing that needs to be able to happen within an error correction system is being able to slow down, rest, and heal in even the ways that we're relating to each other. Can we listen in a way where we can actually recognize that our mental models do not correspond with reality, and it's through interaction with each other that we get to error correct our mental models. Maybe around the second question, I need a reminder of what that was now.
Please go ahead, Josh.
It was in regards to education and how we change at the speed of learning.
So, right. I think it's interesting that you're using those two words. And as I'm going through my own sense of deconstructing internalized patriarchy, but I'm also deconstructing a kind of Christian framework that is also being built up in a different way. So I've noticed that I don't necessarily have to throw everything out, like tear everything down and then just get rid of it. I can actually start to take these ideas and bring them into different communities. And I was noticing how a lot of these ideas around the centrality of love really connect to a lot of people across political and social divides. And if we're able to do that in a way that accesses the language that another person is speaking, it becomes a kind of translation process of, okay, first of all, I need to be able to learn someone else's language. And when we start to come into a kind of understanding through this mutual understanding of, even though we might be speaking the same English language, we might have different meanings for the same words that we're using. And that seems to be what's happening at a systemic level, particularly within the media environment of the United States, where those media systems have been weaponized. So how do we get away from those screens? First of all, I think it helps to be in these sorts of conversations and start to extend those conversations into, maybe we're doing something like what Bucky was doing was, okay, let's get all these people into the same room interacting with something physical. And that shifts understanding, because you're not only speaking in words, you're speaking in the language of shared experience. And it goes beyond just trying to figure out if we're even speaking metaphysically the same language, even though the words are the same. If there's emotional attunement, if there's physical proximity, if there's less likelihood to get into these polarized ways of being if we can actually be together in the way we've evolved as human beings. I think that'll go a long way.
Thank you, Stephen. George, I want to give a short answer from our 52 living ideas and what we have been doing. With CJ, we have been doing this idea of collaborating for comprehensivity. I think the best kind of accelerator of learning that I know of is to do something like what we've been doing. We have people coming from different contexts, all presenting their thoughts, being put against, kind of right next to one another, correcting itself. It's, thoughts from many, many different fields, like Tao Te Ching, Buckminster Fuller, Louis Sullivan, the Bible, people building different models, and all of them interacting together and talking to each other and doing correction each other. Because it's really, in order to learn, you have to talk to people and you have to listen to people. And if each person is doing that, and bigger that community is, more diverse the community is, more flat the community is, that anybody should feel comfortable presenting what they have, however great, however little, and then being able to try to put it together and do that, like what we do every day. So do that on a daily basis, and you learn a little bit faster than what you can possibly do or actually a lot faster than what you can do on your own, no matter how hard you try. Because, so thank you very much. Fantastic questions. Next up is going to be Jeannie, followed by Evanique and Joe. Jeannie.
Well, Stephen, I love your models, and your graphics are just beautiful. And I can see that you've put a lot of thought into, coming up with these things. It's just incredible. What I noticed is that I think, and this is something you're saying, is that the connecting of human beings, the collective part is really where we're running short. And but with your models, you can see that you take the inner and you take the outer, and then the interactions between people is sandwiched between those two things. And that kind of gives us stability to, why are we here? Basically answering that question. And just as an end, I wanted to ask you, could you explain the word synarchy?
Yeah, very good question. Syn is a Greek prefix for together, and archeim has to do with the concept of rule. So in a hierarchy, then there would be a kind of top-down structure. And this comes back to this question around, what's the difference between education and learning? I would say education would be a top-down model of disseminating information in an industrial scale process that allows for a kind of error correction process that is called standardized testing. and then you're able to then filter the directions of human beings into a particular kind of maybe a conveyor belt or a funnel of different job opportunities. And this is in direct contrast to what Buckminster Fuller would have maybe wanted to encourage, is that we all get into the process of learning how to be designers. And the reason I would say that is, for me, design is the process of learning how to learn. And so this is in a way sort of answering that, both those questions of how do we change the way we interact and be able to learn or change at the speed of learning. The learning process happens much more quickly. All the studies will probably verify that the best way of learning is not to be sitting in rows of chairs being talked to by a teacher. It's actually through being able to teach each other. Once you get to that level of being able to teach someone else about what you're learning, then you're at the highest level of learning possible. And that's what organisms do, is they're actually sharing entire libraries through their DNA. If that's what we're learning from Lynn Margulis about the interactions that are actually happening at the microbiological level, is that DNA is not deterministic. They're actually libraries of opportunities and possibilities that organisms are trading back and forth. And if we recognize that we can do that, we are these living beings who have not only DNA libraries, but also cognitive libraries that we are sharing. The way that we're sharing on the internet is one way, but that also is being co-opted by a corporate industrial model that, having been through the meat grinder of design and what these corporate structures actually do to a creative collective learning organization or organism, is that they start putting this hierarchical model on top of everything that then starts replicating that same structure. So they create, it's interesting that they're called corporations, because corpus is a body, and they're pretending that they're bodies, but they are not bodies. They are impersonators. They are viruses impersonating human beings within legal structures. And I think that's what we need to get past, is recognizing, how did those legal structures get made? Well, it was by stealing the land of indigenous peoples and creating legal structures that said, here's the boundaries, don't cross them, or we have the words to prove that we can apply penalties to your behavior. Essentially, it was any behavior that was not in alignment with a corporate industrial colonial model. And so when we can understand that, oh, the corporation is the virus, the legal structures are the virus, then we can start to disentangle ourselves from those viruses by making our own agreements with each other. We actually put things in plain language and say, I'm going to make this agreement to be in reciprocity with the earth, in reciprocity with you as my fellow being, because if we're going to take the even the Christian ethic of, this is kind of what this is meant to be, is like, love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength. Well, that's the model. And to love your neighbor as yourself. Yourself might be smaller, a child, but it's through that interaction you're recognizing, through the interaction, I'm recognizing that I am no different. We are in the same environment. There is no individual other than the universe itself. And recognizing that when I'm interacting with another, I'm interacting with myself, and there's a feedback loop that's happening. Through that interaction, I'm creating more of myself. And and so that to me would be the image of a synarchy, is that kind of interaction of, we are doing this together because we are together, we are one. And just to give you a sense of what my meditation practice is, it's actually a mnemonic based on on this model going from the body, and I'll put it at the bottom because that's in the calendar. That's the winter solstice, and then this is the summer solstice, and then I'm just going around the orbit of the Earth around the sun is what's happening within this model. So this model becomes kind of multidisciplinary, transdisciplinary. You can start playing around with it at the level of a child learning colors, but then you can start teaching PhD students about UX design and how do you understand what you're designing for at the design level, where you're creating products that need to meet the needs of this whole being, not just the mind, not just extracting resources from the body, but actually taking into account there's a whole being here. And so this has been my poetry. I am enough because we are enough. My body is connected to the senses of the earth. I am infinite because we are infinite. My mind is connected to the spirit of the sun. I am one because we are one. My heart is connected to the soul of the moon. I am love because we are love. My whole being is connected to the life of the universe. And so it's this thing that I've been playing with as well around what goes into the canon of a metaphysical sacred text and what is left out. Well, a lot of times there needs to be things left out because there are technological limitations. So with a biblical codex, you start having to recognize, well, I can only fit so many books into this format before I don't have enough monks to be able to copy this thing out. So I'm going to have to limit what I put in here. And then you go through a process of, okay, let's convene the council. Let's figure out what goes in, what doesn't. And then the unintended consequence of that is that you've now created something that artificially is limited by the technology of the communication substrate. And now that we're at the level of we can share all of this information on the internet, and that outmoded way of sharing information doesn't have to truncate our sense of the world. We can actually use the book of nature to complement our sacred text and to extend it to recognize, oh, there's a lot of meaning that was there that was hidden. And now we can extend it into, oh, day 1, day 2, day 3. That sort of connects to the mind, heart, body paradigm. There's a light, water, land kind of structure to time that is going on in cycles. And this becomes ways of thinking about how we build architecture, and it connects to, destroy this temple and I will raise it in 3 days. So not everyone might believe in that cosmology, but I can still communicate to people with that kind of cosmology, with the same language, and start to go, I think there's some correlation here, and we might have a lot actually in common.
Thank you, Stephen. So folks would love to hear more questions. Please focus on questions because I want Stephen to be able to elaborate. And then we will have time for comments as well. So next up is going to be Evanik, Joe, Mona, and Mike. Evanik.
Thank you, Stephen. Thank you so much for just a great presentation overall. And I have questions and comments, but the first one that I wanted to start off with, and if I have time, I'll get to the other one. And the next go around, of course. So my question is, you were talking about the earth and how the earth can be reset. And I guess my question is more of a practical one, since you were talking about, documenting the community into existence. So my question is, how do you get buy-in from human beings who don't believe that our actions are deteriorating our natural resources, in the sense that we are, like, through our actions, we are contributing to the destruction of the earth?
So what comes to mind, first of all, is there's a book by Anand Giridharadas called The Persuaders. And the idea that he speaks of there is that if there's someone who has different ideas, isn't somehow disconnected from what you're trying to argue, there might be ways of still being in conversation, being a persuader, and recognizing we don't have to go like, well, you don't believe the same thing, so hard pass. We can't even find common ground here. Very often he's saying that most people are 60-40. When it comes to where their positions are, there is still wiggle room in their ideas. And what he does in that case is first start asking questions about, hey, what's going on in your life? Where are the points of struggle or even the points of failure in this other person's life? And once you find where those things are, you can probably start to draw lines towards those things that are causing the crisis, which they might be unaware of. And by actually bringing a kind of empathetic lens to the other person's experience, it shifts the conversation from one of opposition to, oh, it feels like you're on my side. And it's interesting what Anand is speaking of in these political conversations that are happening, is that there's a sense that there's this polarization. It's black and white, but really it's not. There's so many different levels of gray. And can you find the nuance, find the grays, find the color there? And when you start to share that common experience of being human, now you're on the same ground. And you might not want to start with, that thing's actually happening. The other thing that I'm noticing is that even if they have a hard line against, I will never be able to cross over into that position, there might be a way to recognize that change is happening, whether that person likes it or not. And that position actually is a very minority view, but they're the loudest. They just happen to be loudest because they're holding the megaphone of the corporate media. But once you get into an environment where there can be error correction in a collective sense, there is actual collective sense making happening, I feel like those opinions are just going to be so fringe that they become more and more marginal, and the more reasonable opinions start to create a more of a center of gravity. So I think it has a lot to do more actually with the kinds of of interactions that we have limited ourselves to. If it's text, if it's visual, if it's remote, then we're already creating barriers in our communication that are breaking down the possibility to understanding. And so we have to then get into a mode of trying to understand, how can I improve the level of communication that's happening here, going beyond just the words, going more towards the nonverbal communication. Human communication is so rich, and our technologies have artificially limited that communication. So that would be my best advice, would be, how do you get beyond those limitations of those barriers? You actually strip off the barriers of the communication mode.
Thank you. Thank you, Stephen, and thank you, Evanique. Next up is Joe, followed by Mona. Joe.
Hi, Stephen, and thank you for presenting this evening. Those graphics were remarkable. One of the questions that I have is about the principles of collaboration, specifically, and how you arrived at those in particular, because I start to, if I'm starting to map them out, just as you did, like, you have something like justice that falls underneath empathy. And I kind of look at something like justice as being a principle to start with, instead of maybe empathy or something like that, which actually could lead to like almost certain types of bias in a way. I'm just asking, and that's a very specific question, but it's just a different model with the principles of collaboration. I just would generally, how did you arrive at those particular categories in order with your thinking?
So yeah, it's a really interesting question, that leads me back to the experience of being a designer. And then so we, in a corporate environment, we had deadlines, and I was given a design problem, a design brief, and then a certain amount of time to be able to come up with something. And somehow I was able to always create something within that time constraint that met that design brief. And oftentimes I was asked, well, how did you do that? And if I was going to ask myself, I would just say, actually, I don't know. I was doing that intuitively. And it took me a while, after coming out of that production environment, to be able to start articulating what that process was actually like, when I was having to teach it to students, or to try to model it within a mentoring environment. And so, so the interesting thing about this process has been that Veronica Anderson, in this ensoulment process that she's been taking me through, has been helping me to almost let go of the mental constraints placed around my experience artificially. So in a state of trauma, I was actually ignoring a lot of information from my emotional sense making. And there's things happening within the body as well. So the way I was being introduced to my sense of my emotional states was to pick up a book called The Language of Emotions by Carla McLaren. And through that process, reconnecting to my emotional states, my physical states, even my senses, in addition to my mental states. And so so that was the interesting thing of going through this process of, if I was going to say, yeah, I don't know, it was really intuitive, that would be the off the cuff kind of response. But the other one would be, well, if I'm going to get into like the woo-woo space now, it would be, I was starting to learn that there was a kind of sensation of affirmation that I would feel with sort of radiating out of the core of my chest. And it would be this tingling sensation that would radiate throughout my body. Now, that doesn't happen all the time, but there have been moments where I can just look at something and then I'll have this feeling. And to me, that is this sense of affirmation that I was starting to relate to an actual personal connection to what I was sensing as the earth responding, if I can say it that way. Or if I'm going to take it beyond that physical kind of phenomenon, it would be, I was also wondering, well, in the cosmology that I was raised in, I was told that there was a spirit, and I couldn't connect to that spirit. And through this process, I was starting to recognize, oh, could that be a sense of the spirit? Because the spirit in that cosmology indwells in a sort of incarnation. This is sort of going back to maybe some of the things that Shrikant and others were speaking of in other talks, but also something that has been coming up in other sort of Christian deconstruction podcasts that I listen to, is people are letting go of these very hierarchical and limited perspectives of the world, but at the same time, it's opening up their connections to other faith traditions. And what is happening is there's a kind of error correction happening between different cosmologies or different metaphysical systems or sacred traditions. And that's kind of what I've been doing with this as well, is just taking a look at what else is out there. And so I'll take a look at the different forms of capital, or I'll take a look at Kate Raworth's donut economics and notice that there's some very interesting categories there. Why did they come up with 12? Because that interestingly aligns with the model that I've created. The calendar model is actually my model for, okay, I'm going to focus on each of these words and see if I'm really getting this sense. I'm going to sit with this word for maybe a week or for a couple days, based on this plan that I have to, okay, I'm going to see if I can actually create new senses. So there's this podcast called Inner Cosmos. I think it's with Mark Eagleman. I might have that name wrong, something like that. And so there's one episode that is actually talking about what is the neoplasticity of human beings. Can they actually create new neural pathways that create new sensory capabilities within a human being? And it's well documented. If if someone loses sight, then a lot of that brain structure starts reforming pathways towards enhancing other senses. And so this is just an experiment, a personal Bucky guinea pig bee kind of experiment of, well, if the Gaia hypothesis is true and Earth is self-regulating, how is it doing that? Am I a nerve cell in the body of the Earth? Are all the living beings kind of a nerve cell? And in that way, can there be a reciprocal form of communication that's going on, not just me sending information to the Earth through me being a nerve cell, but actually, can I also receive messages? So it's just been a fascination with me around, like, what is communication? As I was growing up, I'm like, what's time? What's this book that my parents gave me, and God is supposed to be communicating to me through these symbols in a book translated into English, not like 400, 500 years ago, or maybe a little bit more than that, 800 years ago, but not that long ago, because in English that was outlawed. You couldn't actually translate the Bible without being burned at the stake. So like, we're pretty young to this whole communication thing. And I had no idea how to communicate to people when I was young. Like, no one taught me, because everyone was just talking at me. And I was like an audience for everybody's information. And so not being in conversation made me very attuned to wanting to be in conversation and trying to figure that out. How do I actually be in a reciprocal mode of communication that actually makes me feel like I'm integrated, I'm part of this, not just like a passenger. I have agency here, and I can, and so becoming a designer was to actually be in the seats of power, or at least across from them, and then communicating with them and figuring out, how is this whole media system working? And then realizing, this is a shit show. I don't want anything to do with this. I want to actually figure out how to tear it down from the inside out, but I don't know how to do that on my own. So I'm starting to do the error correction with other human beings to try to let them know this communication system that they've given us is just one way. We can actually shift that to be like always on, always in this interaction, that then we have ways to error correct way quicker than the 3 decades, 4, 5 decades that it's taken me to get here. I'm hoping that we can create a completely different model of how we communicate with each other that is reciprocal.
Wonderful. Thank you, Stephen. Next up, we got many questions, Stephen. So we got questions from Mona, Mike, Paul, and Bill. And after that, we're going to go to comments. So right now, just questions. Mona. Let me see. Give me just a second. Okay, hold on. What's going on with Mona? Mona, are you there? Need to unmute. Oh, just a second. My fault. There was a problem. Mona, go ahead. Sorry about that.
Thank you. Well, thank you for the presentation. This is just awesome. And I feel that to some extent you already answered my question, but I'm just going to mention it briefly. I'm very encouraged that you mentioned slowing down and turning inwards and just trying to sort of see things from a different perspective. my comment, it's not a comment, it was a question initially, is how you put love at the center of all those circles that kind of colors everything else. The reason why I want to bring it up is that I came across a poem this weekend that talks exactly about this. 12 angels with 12 different lessons. Each one says, without love, say justice is just cruelty. And it goes on and on. Without love, intelligence is just craft. So it keeps going on and on, building on that.
Mona, please go ahead and read the poem.
You want me to read the poem?
Yeah, that would be wonderful.
It's called 12 Angels. 12 angels. I need my glasses, I'm sorry. The lilac angel bears the sign of my perfectness. The angel said to me, you know, without the justice, without love is cruelty. The indigo angel bears the sign of my freedom. And the angel said to me, intelligence without love is craft. The blue angel bears the sign of my dreams. And the angel said to me, the authority without love is violence. The green angel bears the sign of my calmness. And the angel said to me, the dignity without love is arrogance. Yellow angel bears the sign of my faith. The angel said to me, the wealth without love is self-interest. The orange angel bears the sign of my childhood, and the angel said to me, the upbringing without love is hypocrisy. The red angel bears the sign of my life. The angel said to me, the belief without love is illusion. The white angel bears the sign of my speech, and the angel said to me, the truth without love is fault-finding. The gray angel bears the sign of my death. The angel said to me, the praising without love is mendacity. The black angel bears the sign of my mystery. And the angel said to me, without love, you could not have been born, David. The colorless angel bears the sign of my spirit. This transparent angel said to me, love is the only thing that will transform you and make you feel your transfiguration today. You know it better than we do. And here you are. The time has become endless. And here we are, 12, all around you.
Beautiful. Thank you. Thank you so much, Mona. Thank you.
Yeah, I really appreciate
Stephen,
that.
if you'd like to respond to that, you're welcome to do that, or we can go to the next one.
Yeah. So this idea about 12 around 1, that's really forming a lot of the basis of this. Love being at the center. Really, I was trying to figure out, here again, it's that sense of a lack of understanding about what love was that led me to this decades-long exploration of how does one create love? Because that was where I was coming from, was that sense of a lack of love, and being in that space where I'm told, if you don't fulfill these commandments, then you're going to hell. I'm like, well, that leaves me in a really precarious position. If you haven't taught me how to communicate, and I don't even know how to even establish a basic friendship, how am I ever going to get to the that high bar of love? That must mean I am destined for hell. So that was not a pleasant way to grow up. Just having that internal sense that I could not tell anybody that I could pretend as much as I liked that I was following all the rules and doing everything I thought I needed to be in everyone's good books. But internally, that sense was just not there. And so it became this kind of lifelong quest of like understanding what does love look like then? Because if I can't identify it within myself, then and I don't know how to express it to those I love, then I'm going to be completely lost. So I was really dedicating my whole life to going, I don't know what this looks like, but I'm going to figure out every mean within my disposal to use whatever communication modes that I have access to figure it out. And thankfully, over time, like a lot of these skills were things that I was able to learn. Communication, basic communication, for example. But I'm still in this error correction mode of, how do I improve my relationship with my wife? Because I've internalized these systems and I'm only becoming more aware of them by being able to create models that show me, oh, that's not healthy. I need to avoid that. But I think it's still a process, of figuring out, how do we slow down? How do we rest? How do we heal? How do we shift from the mode of doing into the mode of perception? And it's from that shift in perception that that I'm finding things are not just shifting only in myself. Things start to shift in other people when I start reflecting back ideas that feel more resonant with others, and then they're like, oh, how do you sense that? How did you know that? How did and sometimes I don't even know what I'm doing. I'm just like, oh, well, people are just calling me, you're just a calm presence in a room. And then when you do speak, there's something profound that comes out, and it's not about oftentimes being the one at the center of attention. It's being able to take that fly in the wall, back of the room position, and then go, how can I observe what's going on here? And when I start to really absorb what I feel is really happening there, then I can start to actually articulate, oh, I think this connects to another experience that I had. And that starts to create a much larger and connected sense of the whole. So yeah, that to me really becomes the definition of love, is connecting, maybe going back to that question about, justice. Well, that feels like a very heady idea. It's trapped in this area of language that is now inaccessible to other parts of myself. When I start to integrate that, what does that word mean? What does it feel like? How do I sense it in the world? How do I embody it? How do I physically perform justice? Now there's a holistic sense of that word that is different than, okay, I just read that word in a book and I feel like I've got the dictionary definition figured out. But if I don't know what it is by actually performing it or by receiving it, then I'm still disconnected from that word. I think it's in the shared experience that we actually come to this recognition, realization. What is love?
Wow. So Stephen, thank you. Thank you for sharing that. I mean, this is a profound, profound issue, and most people do not talk about this. The best representation of this that I've seen is in Victor Hugo's Les Miserables, where there is a convict who has lost all sense, all hope, all charity, all love, thanks to some minor thing of in the name of justice. And then you have got the bishop who does things, and how Osset, a little child transforms him. And then what happens to the policeman who is pursuing justice. So if you want to look at the issue of justice and law and love being dramatized in terms of their actual meaning and the relationship between their meaning, and how it plays out psychologically through multiple individuals, how it plays out in society. I strongly recommend everybody the Les Miserables by Victor Hugo. Thank you. Thank you, Stephen. Mike, can we please have a question?
A brief question. Mona's poem kind of gives a good exclamation point to your excellent presentation. The question is the connection between all these things. I envision that you are the incarnation of the Bauhaus school of the 1930s. And that was not just design things, but it was language, thought, and environment are all connected in a very complicated way. That the environment gives thought to language, and language gives thought to thought, and gives thought to building things. Now, Buckminster Fuller and Christopher Alexander are all connected to Bauhaus through one of your professors at Bauhaus, Alfred Korzybski. And and Alfred Korzybski is the guy who saved the life of Buckminster Fuller when he had his nervous breakdown and attempted suicide. So how are all these things connected? I also add that Samuel Hayakawa, who was a semanticist in language, was a student of Korzybski, and he later became a senator and a big author in some of the things that you're talking about.
Mike, what's your question? Go ahead.
So the question is, how are all these things connected? And I'm a free member of your Substack. How much of this material is in your Substack, including your slides?
At the moment, a lot of the material is spread around to different publications. So there's a fair amount of it in the trimtab.substack.com publication. I created that one out of one of the Buckminster Fuller Institute gatherings that they have monthly. And there was a question that was being shared around, like, how do we maintain connections through in between times, in between these monthly gatherings? And I suggested Substack would be maybe a good way to do that, because they have lots of these different modes of communication, including being able to post articles, mail out to mailing lists, and they had recently added notes and Twitter-like kind of features and chats. So there's that's really why I'm using Substack. Is it gets out of the the dominant modes of advertising funded and generated social media platforms that are really about scraping personal data and monetizing it, whereas Substack has a different model. So getting back to the question about the Bauhaus and how there are connections to the architecture and geometry and art of Buckminster Fuller, you're adding a new name to all of the different connections. I wasn't aware of that particular name. I was aware of Joseph and Annie Albers at Black Mountain College, who were there when Buckminster Fuller was playing around with actually building geodesic domes and connecting with Kenneth Snelson around tensegrity structures so yeah, there are interestingly so many interesting connections between even going back to the inventor kindergarten and how that connection through the exploration of Platonic solids and crystals is also a connection that led to the geodesic dome. So following those threads is just absolutely fascinating to me. And yeah, thanks for bringing that up.
Thank you, Stephen, and thank you, Mike. Next up is going to be Paul, Bill, Elle, and Eleanor. Paul.
Hi, thank you, Stephen, for your deep thought and put in such beautiful form. My question sort of stems from what Evanique was talking about, but based on all the conversations since then, I can say more about it, which is, it seems to me that it's integral to your way of thinking now is some inner work you did. And I would call that inner work, one way of putting it is a deconstruction of core beliefs. And that's in modern therapies as something, because with the core beliefs, you end up with automatic thoughts that lead to distortions. So I'm hearing implicitly in what you're saying is the answer to, part of the answer to Evanique's question is not only having wonderful meetups like Shrikant has, but if you're going to be a person who's actually listening, and you have to do the inner work. And then I'm wondering if you've modeled that form of human consciousness. Like one example, it's not a model of it, but I'm thinking of the OODA loop. It's an internal learning method of the brain as it iterates with experiments. You might even call them, and we use those in therapies, like try this experiment. So where is that in your whole theoretical model is kind of my question.
Wonderful. So this gets to what we're exploring in the Design Science Studio. So my connection to Veronica Anderson was through an understanding that we seem to be working on the same project. And so when I was working on an interface for navigating metaphysical gravity, I was actually making a proposal to the Living Systems Collaboratory and UC Irvine, University of California, Irvine, that was really heading up this Living Systems Collaboratory. And it was recognizing we're working on the same project. Mine is actually trying to figure out how to embody love, and I put it in the language of a kind of Bucky Fuller kind of way of, all right, well, if we're going to be a trim tab and we're navigating this metaphorical ship through life, then what is the interface? You know, okay, if love is metaphysical gravity and we are really in these relationships of energy between these celestial bodies and our own bodies. Is there a way to do that inner work of learning how to sense that? In effect, you know, being somewhat inspired by, there are indigenous cultures where they know how to tell the cardinal directions internally. They don't have to look at anything to orient themselves to where they are on the earth. And I thought that was amazing. Like, if that is possible, then there's a whole lot of other things that I'm not capable of, but that I can learn to maybe integrate into how I'm being. So yeah, that was recognizing in what Veronica was working on was a project called Home Dash. And what she hadn't realized was she was working on the geoscope, but she didn't have language for it. She'd never heard of Buckminster Fuller's ideas about how to get inside the earth and sense from that perspective what is going on around the whole by having that inner perspective. And so the acronym Home Dash, home is actually an acronym for Heart of Mother Earth. And what she was creating was the dashboard for the heart of Mother Earth. But she put it in a way that, okay, well, I'm dealing with architects and geodesigners and geospatial kind of engineers, and so I need to be speaking in a language where I'm going to be taken seriously. So maybe that's not what I'm going to lead with, but that is at the core of what I'm trying to do here, is actually sense what's going on in this inner sense of the earth that is actually connecting to our sense of what's going on within our own bodies. And how do we actually attune these bodies? And it's not just me and the earth, it's me, the earth, the sun and the moon, and all the other bodies in the solar system, and all the other bodies in the universe that have brought this about. There is no separation. So if I can understand what's going on in my inner life, then I can connect to what's going on in the outer life. And yeah, that was the impetus. It was, I got to figure out how to work with Veronica because we're both working on the same project. And she has this line that she adds to what she's doing to make a world that loves itself. So it was like, okay, these are definitely the same projects. So then I just noticed, oh, she's got this installment course. What is that? So it was just like a tricky way to figure out, well, I can be in conversation with her on a weekly basis by taking her course, or her being asking her to be my coach. And it was through that interaction that I recognized, well, not only do I want to collaborate with her on this project, I have work to do on myself. And I was in a year of crisis. And we were coming to her with this question of, in the Builders Collective, we're trying to build community, and we need to have a trauma-informed approach to what we're doing. And that was what she was offering, was a trauma-informed approach to architecture and that design process. But she starts from the inside, doing deep design, starting from the inside out, and then building that transformative architecture by working on the inner architecture first. And so now it's like a year and a half later, and we're actually in the process of possibly starting an inner and outer architecture institute, where it is integrating what I feel like Bucky was speaking to is synergetics, explorations in the geometry of thinking. I mean, that's taking the geo and the metrics, the quantification of that external outer world, and then connecting it to that internal thinking, the cognitive experience of what it means to be human. And so really that's what this is about, is reintegration of these two fields that in the scientific realm, there's this, you know, the quantum mechanics are separated from the special theory of relativity, gravitational theory, and they're having trouble figuring out how do these two things go together. And what I'm trying to say with these models is, well, you're not thinking of the whole. You're not starting with the universe. If you're not taking into account mind, heart, and body in connection to time, energy, and matter, then you're leaving a whole body of information out of your inquiry. And it's by reintegrating that metaphysical and physical that is going to lead to the pataphysical creative imagination that we need to get out of this crisis.
Thank you, Stephen, and great question, Paul. Next up is going to be Bill, Elso, and Eleanor. Bill, go ahead.
Thanks. My contribution is not a question, it's a suggestion regarding the tetrahedral structure of the internal architecture of internal experience. So if we are not yet at the time when suggestions are fair game, I will wait.
Please go ahead and make the suggestion. Let's keep it brief so that, because there are lots of people, so go ahead and make the suggestion.
Great. I've got a timer. I can set it for 2 minutes. Is that fair?
Good. That's perfect.
However, to make this suggestion, I need to screen share something on my computer screen. Can you co-host me?
Just a second. All right, hold on. Give me a second. Hold on.
And maybe just to add,
Go ahead.
This is what I'm hoping for is even going back to maybe Joe's question about, you know, how do you know that that word actually corresponds to that particular area of the model? And I don't actually know. I'm just trying it out and seeing how it feels, and if it resonates with myself, my inner sense, and it's connecting with other people, then I'm starting to feel like maybe there's something here. But yeah, this is interesting. The interconnection of two tetrahedrons it's kind of maybe building out the full model.
Let's go ahead and let Bill explain. Bill, go ahead.
Okay, I'll start the 2-minute timer right now. Can I be heard?
Yeah.
Yes, go ahead.
Here we go. Okay. So you can see my cursor moving around?
Yes.
Okay, these are two tetrahedrons, and the solid lines are in the plane of the computer screen. The dashed lines are behind the plane of the computer screen, away from the viewer. So it's a three-dimensional really concept that's being conveyed in this two-dimensional screen. Is that clear?
Yep.
Okay. So this is connected to this double helix framework over here on the right side of the screen in the following way. So this is a double helix with some horizontal lines added. If you remove the horizontal lines
We
imaginarily.
can't see.
I
We
don't think
can't see the
we
double
can't
helix.
see that part.
Oh, let me.
Share your computer screen. It's
Oh.
one particular thing.
Oh, okay. This is going to be a little more difficult than I thought. So stop screen sharing, start screen sharing. Let's see the double helix. So apparently I can't share both at the same time. So now you can see that, right?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. So that's unfortunate that I cannot share both at the same time. I wish I could. But anyway, so there's a double helix here with horizontal lines added. If you remove the horizontal lines imaginarily, then it's just a double helix. So the horizontal lines correspond to those horizontal lines in that previous graphic that are in the plane of the screen. But then each time that the double helix crosses, there's a horizontal line perpendicular to the screen, if you can imagine. So that this double helix is going in 3 dimensions. Do you see how it keeps crossing back over itself? And in that sense, it duplicates the tetrahedron shape from before. And the connection to the internal architecture of a space is, now can you see this diagram of the human body on my screen?
Nope. Nope.
Nope.
You'll stop sharing and share it again.
Okay, that's unfortunate. So I'll stop sharing, screen share, and share that one. Okay. So you see how now you can see it, right?
Yes.
This is the vagal nerve. And it's got a double helix structure in the way that I explained before. I have another graphic. I won't share it here. I can email it to Stephen Bao at his email site. So the point is that the vagal nerve, for which there's scientific evidence from medical scientists, has this double helix structure because it's got a left-right dimension of the nerve pathways, but it's also got a front-back dimension. It crosses over on the front and it crosses over on the back of the human body. So that's the information I wanted to put out there. There's more that could be said, but I've passed my 2-minute mark, so I'll stop. Thanks for listening.
Wonderful. Bill, thank you for putting this out there. Really appreciate that. I particularly like this kind of correspondence between the 2 tetrahedrons, the double helix, and then the chakras. Go ahead, Stephen, if you have any comments.
Yeah, I'm very curious about how the model that I've been playing with. You know, I'm a graphic designer, so I've been stuck in a 2-dimensional plane for quite a while, and this is part of what I've been exploring as well. Is what happens if we take away the screens, take away this 2-dimensional frame that we use as our frame of reference for the world. It's that kind of embodiment and that kind of dynamic motion that I feel like is missing from the models that I create. Even when I'm creating the dimensional model, I'm wondering, well, how does it move? And maybe that's taking the metaphor too far, right? But I think what you've brought in actually does help to maybe create more sense around. In the World Weavers, Mark Wagnon speaks much about consciousness, about how we connect to that inner sense. And the model that he uses is a torus. So I think, maybe finding that connection between the tetrahedron, the double helix, and the torus. The torus would be in reference when Mark is speaking to how do we organize collectively. That is his ideal image of what synarchy looks like. And when he brings up the image, it's bring in the spectrum of consciousness. So he's drawing a lot from human design, as well as he's been following John Young's 512 project. So yeah, it's interesting how there are some very interesting connections to consciousness that I would love to explore. And how do these geometries actually interact as a kind of interface between the physical and the metaphysical to create the pataphysical kind of torus shape.
Can you just explain what pataphysical is?
Right. So if you're going to look it up on Wikipedia, there's some information on pataphysics there, but very often you'll find information that is speaking more critically or negatively about the idea of pataphysics. It has to do with, in the way that I'm speaking of it, there are different layers to the model of sense making that I'm exploring. So there's if we're going to think of it in kind of layers of time, there's a foundation of the past that we build on, and so I like to think of time in the shape of coral. So coral might have a root structure, or a tree, for example. Tree kind of has that torus shape. It has a root structure, a trunk, and then it reaches out into the air. So you've got a kind of way of looking at the tree rooting itself in the past, has all of this information to draw from. That's the nutrients that are providing life to the tree. The life of the tree is the trunk structure and what is growing out of it. But as it reaches into the air, it's creating another sphere of possibilities from which grows fruit as it's drawing energy from the sun. So in a sense, the physics is the past orientation. The metaphysics is the present orientation or layer, and the pataphysics is the future orientation. So it has somewhat analogous kind of, if we're going to take a look at the model, the body, if we're going to orient it down, is grounding us in the present. The mind is oriented towards the past. It's getting all its models, memory, even sense of what the future could be based on anticipation of what's already experienced. But heart is sensing into the future. And I have a kind of intuition that the heart is the sense-making organ for the pataphysical direction that we can go in as a species. So if we follow that heart direction, we are moving in a way that is in attunement with other bodies, other human beings, other living beings, and the earth itself in relationship to all else. So hope that
Thank you.
helps to clarify.
Yes, thank you. Next up is going to be Elso, followed by Eleanor. Elso.
Hi, thanks. I had both a question and some comments, and I'm not sure of the process, so shall I bookmark the comments for later?
No, you can go ahead and keep the comments. You can do questions and comments, but keep them brief, under 2 minutes, both put
Okay.
together.
I love the poem. I haven't not heard trauma informed and context to invention before. It's really beautiful to hear that orientation. The poem reminded me of Cynthia Ozick, who is a poet who was once asked in an interview, why do you write about love? And she said, well, what else is there to write about? Also reminds me of Gwendolyn Brooks, who is a Pulitzer poet and African-American Pulitzer poet who writes a poem called Everybody Here is Infirm, and talks about the frailty. The last line is, I'm enough to be beautiful, you are beautiful too. So with that, I also wonder about invention and exclusion, because I take exclusion as exclusion of the people who could most benefit from invention excluded in the conversation, and in many other areas. And this is very common with progress benefits certain people and not others. I like Buckminster Fuller's approach to be more democratic, but it's often not. And I wondered about how you know who is being left out in the, because leaving people out and parties out and harmed out, I believe, is violence as well. And I wonder, with this idea of compassion and empathy, which I think is a real pandemic, not loneliness, that the Surgeon General mentioned, because the Surgeon General has also interest, I think, in the Calm app and has monetary interest in that. And I've mentioned this elsewhere, that I think you can get to the loneliness pandemic through compassion and empathy. At least that's one impression I have. The main point is who's being left out. And something that struck me was the discussion of needing to be in person, because you don't get all of the, and maybe I misunderstood, but I heard that you must be in person, or it's better to be in person because you get more of a context of the human relationship, and there are limitations to video or all of these other technologies, but yet virtual and all of these technologies have opened up access to people who've been excluded before, and it's dangerous to be in person. So how to rectify having all voices in and holding that, and maybe that humility of we only know what we know now, and we'll learn more as we grow, and that humility is I think critical. But anyway, how do you know who's not got a voice? Like, we move forward and then we forget someone or something or some group. How do you correct that? And what would Buckminster say? Thanks.
Thank you, Al. Go ahead, Stephen.
Ooh, speaking for Buckminster Fuller feels like a little beyond my pay grade, but I agree that the way that we are designing our systems tend to be in favor of those who are defining what progress means, what development means, what sustainable means. And I came across a talk recently about going into different spaces back from the year that I was born, in 1968. So I'm going to forget his name. Ivan Illich was writing about it's in writing, but it was actually a talk that he gave to a conference of people involved in the conference of inter-American projects, something to do with that. That was the title. The title of his talk was "To Hell with Good Intentions." Basically coming from the perspective of the road to hell is paved with good intentions. And so there were people in the Peace Corps and other volunteers who were coming to Mexico, and he was speaking to these young people and students who were coming down to say, hey, we're here to help. And his message to them was basically, don't help because you're not helping. You're coming with a very specific perspective on the world that you are imposing on the rest of the world through a kind of system of export. He's basically saying that there are people in your own communities who are already left out of your own systems, and you're not helping those people. Why are you coming here? So I think this is really important, that in-person can very quickly become another form of colonization. So I think, to your point, that there needs to be a distinction about these epidemics of loneliness, which points to an epidemic of a lack of compassion and a lack of empathy. What I find interesting about the design world at the moment is that there is a shift in understanding around the need for empathy and compassion in the design process, where we actually say we're starting with empathy. We begin with listening. We start by deconstructing our own worldviews, because we know that we are bringing implicit bias into whatever we are doing. So to avoid designing dark patterns into the work that we are doing, we have to be fully aware of what harms are possible through the interaction, as well as what possibilities for help there might be. So it really gets to the core of why I'm creating these models. It was finding something missing within the existing corporate model of how we train designers, which means that we are designing based on, first of all, a poor model of reciprocal or circular relationships of energy, because what these products usually create are funnels that are taking energy and directing it to those who already have, and away from those who actually have needs. So there's some fundamental problems in the way we've structured our systems to be blind to those harms. By not really understanding where empathy fits into the product cycle, the design cycle, where it's, oh, sure, we can get into the mode of understanding how best this person can use our product better so that we can increase our engagement and reach and profits. But that's not what the person needs. At the core of that motivation of using empathy is a motivation of exploitation. And we have to actually fundamentally change the way we think of what the purpose of a corporation is for. It's not a body to funnel resources to those who least need it. It is actually to become a body that fully embodies compassion and empathy, to make sure that energy is properly distributed to all. So I think it's a really important question that I don't have an answer to, that we really need to focus on. this needs to be a primary question in everything that we do about how do we make sure that people are not being left out of the way we design. And we need, I think, to acknowledge that Buckminster Fuller also had some blind spots. Engineering our way out of every problem might not be the way. I think he was getting closer to it in his elder years, because he was in a process of ephemeralizing, recognizing whatever artifacts he was creating before were just models of how we could do more with less. And in the end, he didn't need his artifacts. He just needed himself in interaction with other people, making sure that he had full interaction with his audience by being able to, have the lights on, see their eyes, see the responses, and make it a fully reciprocal interaction. And still, it was like one person presenting to a lot of other people over a number of hours. I mean, it's still not the best mode of interaction. So there's lots of room for innovation and invention. And yeah, thank you for your question.
Thank you, Stephen. I'm going to go with George, Eleanor, and Jeannie. George, go ahead.
Thank you, Stephen. I think that with Bucky, one of the lines that comes to mind is every child's born a genius, and we de-genius them in the way we bring them up. He also mentioned how we are here as unique individual problem solvers on behalf of the universe. And he appreciated the ability of each human in integrity. At the end of his life, he spoke primarily about integrity and had the Integrity Days series with Jamie, his grandson. But he spoke about integrity because he knew that our unique wiring, our unique upbringing, the evolution of our individual spirit was the way that we could gain insights into the functioning of the system that would then give us the expression or the ideas on how we move the system forward in the most efficient way. And that's why in a lot of the things he said that, design this with the lightest, most, the strongest materials of the time, because he realized that those changes in material sciences would be key in the development of the technologies we would utilize. He often talked about how the car was safer and lighter because of our understanding of and engineering of things like crumple zones that allowed us to build a system that was more efficient in dealing with the stresses of an accident to protect the inhabitants. But the other thing is he talked about in from regards of democracy and what we're finding on the planet so far as us grappling as human beings with racism, is that he talked expressly about the fact that skin color was simply a human trait developed through the evolutionary capabilities of the skin color to influence the absorption of vitamin D from the sun. Because if you got too much vitamin D, it was an overdose and it would hurt you. If you didn't get enough, it would hurt you. And you needed the right skin color to modulate through the naked skin exposed to the sun the amount of vitamin D you could get. That's our, in essence, the skin color governs our ability to photosynthesize the vitamin D in our bodies. This research and his intuition in this was supported by, most recently, by the work of Nina Jablonski, who did the work on skin color and its effect on health and vitamin D absorption. So I'd say that Bucky was, in all the people I've studied in my lifetime of searching in this area, he just was really cognizant both about how nature works, and he would bring to people's attention things like there is no up or down, there's only in or out in relation to center. He would talk about how wind doesn't blow, it sucks. You can't push a rope through a house, you have to pull the rope through the house. And he talked about how the wind was actually the atmosphere moving, being pulled by a low pressure from a high pressure. He was constantly trying to educate people as to how the systems work. One of his pet peeves was, the idea of sunrise and sunset. He would say, why can't we just take a globe, put a little cutout of a human being on it, shine a torch, the word for a flashlight, shine a torch onto the globe and spin the globe, and every child will understand exactly the role of the sun and the sunlight on the planet. Instead, we keep saying the sun is rising, the sun is setting, and then that belief system perpetuated over generations, locks in this image in the human that is out of whack with reality and cosmic truth. So you're doing an incredible job, Stephen. I applaud you for your efforts in challenging these misconceptions. So thank you, and I appreciate sharing with all.
Thank you, George. Really appreciate you adding that. Next up is going to be Eleanor, followed by Jeannie.
If I may,
yes,
do you mind if I just respond to George a little bit? Because it brings up an idea for me. So one of the ideas that comes out of the calendar is to give us a different sense of our relationships to these celestial bodies by actually creating a better calendar. Why have a Gregorian calendar in rows and grids, giving us our sense of time? Why not have a way of being able to dial your way through time by being able to see the orientation of the Earth to the sun and the relationship of the moon to the Earth as you're spinning this dial? And you wouldn't have to be like laboriously trying to punch in some sort of strange number that corresponds to some sort of Gregorian date system. You'd actually be like, the DeLorean in Back to the Future would not have a digital interface. It would actually have a visual dial that showed you the relationships of the bodies that would actually correspond to something real.
Well, thank you. Thank you, Stephen. So we're going to have two more questions or comments, and then I'm going to invite people to talk about what they got from this meetup. Okay, and I want Stephen to just listen to what people got from the meetup. Okay, so first just two, and then we'll go for that. So let's go with Eleanor, followed by Jeannie. Eleanor.
Yeah,
thank you for your patience.
It's okay.
Go ahead.
I'm always here whenever you want me to talk. So my question dates back to being a designer. And I was wondering if it's better to be maybe a maker first before a designer, or is maker and designer going hand in hand together? And then I was thinking further and imagining that maybe it would be better to give makers a tool, design for a maker's tool, which helps them to design. Because there are some designers who don't like to make. So therefore, we need to design tools for makers. It's kind of like a symbiotic work, hand in hand, right? A designer doesn't exist without maker. So, and the other idea I had about you saying that energy is being not properly distributed, and how do we make the people not letting out others? And I think we simply have to reward people for their actions, which we don't do. We need a system where people will be rewarded. And obviously, it's all about personal, it goes towards, right now, towards personal behavior or morals. But I do think it would be good to reward people.
Go ahead, Stephen.
Right. Yeah. So what comes to mind when you're, well, maybe I'll go back to the initial question about the distinction between maker and designer. I feel like there was less of a distinction when I was being trained, because as an artist who was being schooled on how to make a living, basically I was being directed towards, well, you can be a starving artist or you can be a commercial artist. And basically commercial artist was what we called a designer back then. But at the time, I was going through school in what I now realize was a very, very unusual experience of becoming a designer, was to be in a room full of equipment to make things. And part of that making process was fully manual kind of process of printing, where you're actually moving pieces of tape and then putting them into a chase, tightening that in, putting that on the press, and then going through the mechanical process of applying that ink to the paper. And there was a dark room, there was silk screen, there was photo typesetting, and so there was, and cameras, and so much of that process was hands-on. It was physically creating things from a beginning to end, going through the entire process, whereas the digital process tends to disconnect people from the manufacturing process or the making process. And so maybe just because of my age, I was there when things were done differently and things were very mechanical and analog. So I've had this well-rounded experience. It is a shame that there is this disconnect now. And I wonder, that's an amazing question to pose to the entire industry. How do you actually create a much more participatory process? And then the other thing that I might say would be we make the role of designer less precious, because for me, everyone is a designer. Everyone is involved in the process of design, whether they know it or not. So 99% Invisible, the creator of that podcast created the title based on the idea that if a designer is doing their job well, design is 99% invisible. But at the same time, he's also saying that everything that a human touches is design. So in that way, every human being is a designer. So by actually sharing the process of learning how to learn with every learner, every human being, and a lot of that is innate. You know, what George was saying before about Bucky saying we genius our children, is that we put them through a industrial education process to refine them into products for an industrial mode of living on the earth to profit those who are funneling the resources. So if we gave permission to every human being to redesign the systems that we're in, we would be empowering everyone to be designers and to be part of that interactive process of figuring out, yeah, where does this energy really need to go? So then sometimes I lose my train of thought. What was the second part of this?
That's good. That's good. We're coming to the end of this.
Yeah, good.
I want Stephen, I want to let people tell
For
you
sure. Yes.
what it was. I don't want to miss that. Okay.
Yes.
So we're going to have Jeannie and quick comments or questions by Jeannie, quick comments and questions by David, and then folks, we would like to hear from you what you got from this meetup. Okay, Jeannie.
Wonderful.
I want to answer the rest of Eleanor's questions with your own words, which is as a reward, the engaging experience. This is enough. I mean, if everybody could have engaging experiences, I think that would be a good reward. The other thing I wanted to respond to is L's, the people left out. But there's also others that are left out, and that's the whole animal world and basically plant world. And it's too late for us to just retreat and say, well, we got to, work on our own little garden. And the effects of what we're doing are so widespread. We're touching everything. Everything is covered with the microplastics. It's, it's too late for us to just retreat and say, we're going to just fix up, our own house. At this point, we already are, engaged in the destruction of other places and other beings. So I think that needs to be part of what, and I think actually that could galvanize people together. I mean, if we all, drew together to help, the animal and plant world survive, I think that could actually, bring humans together.
Thank you. Thank you, Ginny. Quick question or comment by David, and then folks would like to hear what you got from the meetup. David, go ahead.
Just wishing everyone a good week. It's been a great weekend. I started with Shrikant's Friday night Zoom, and then yesterday and today. So I don't know if Joe was there today, the afternoon. Great.
That's fine. What, any questions for Stephen?
Oh, okay. Yeah. Thanks.
Okay, you're good. Thanks.
Yeah.
Thanks, David. Next up, folks would love to hear what you got from this meetup. Okay, and Stephen, please let people say what they want to say, and you can comment at the end. You can keep notes and comment at the end, because I want you to hear what because what happens is that, like, the primary value of these is to get feedback, and we've kind of focused so far on having, because what you're presenting is quite large. So I wanted to give a chance for people to interact with it, for you to elaborate. But now I want people to tell you what they got. So folks, please go ahead and type an exclamation mark and let Stephen know what you got from this meetup. We're going to start with Joe. Joe, go ahead.
Stephen, again, I thank you very, very much for coming here and sharing your slides and speaking to us this evening. I mean, it was a privilege to be here. I mean, I really think that the way you laid out the individual, the collective, the inner, the outer, and how awareness, empathy, and understanding, how all these concepts are actually presented. It's presented in a way that, if we go back through it very carefully, that we can put our own ideas to these. And I think that that's one of the most important things when you're actually, you giving us something, a model to look at, and to really kind of to see where you were going with it, and to maybe integrate some of our own ideas. So for me, I think that you've covered a number of different things on how to think about personal, social, and political and economic systems as well. So you have all four. So putting that down visually, is something that, I'm very grateful for, because that's a very large task. And you did it in a way that enables us to, see how a logical structure would look, and come up with our own ideas. So we can't really ask for anything more, because it allows us to do our own inquiry. So thank you.
Thank you, Joe. Folks, go ahead and type an exclamation mark or raise your hand in Zoom if you would like to tell Stephen what you got from this meetup. Evanik, go ahead.
Thank you, Stephen. I just wanted to let you know, like, the biggest thing I got from this meetup is the integration of mind, body, and spirit in the earth. and how it's all interconnected. And you did it in such a way that it was approachable and easy. Not easy in the sense of, I don't want to downplay how complicated this is, but you simplified it so that we all could understand it. So I appreciate that, and bringing in Bucky's ideas. And I think Joe covered it as well. When you talk, we also incorporated economics and everything else. And so I just want to say thank you for making such a topic like this approachable. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Evanique. Next up is Jeannie. Jeannie, go ahead.
Thank you again, Stephen. Your work is just beautiful. And I want to put in a little plug for, what BFI is doing, the Bucky Fuller Institute. I mean, it's just the most incredible group of people, and they're coming up with great ideas. I saw some of the things from the space camp, and it was just wonderful. I mean, if the whole world was doing what Bucky Fuller Institute is doing, everything would be A-okay. And thank you, Shrikant, for 52 Living Ideas. What you're doing is wonderful too.
Thank you. Thank you, Jeannie. Folks, anybody else wants to comment on what they got from the meetup? You're welcome to do so. My favorite thing about this is, so firstly, I love models. I'm building them all the time. And I think everybody should be building them, because really, I mean, the problem that we are working on is that we're trying to operate in an integrated way. The modern world is analytical, it breaks things down and hopes to put it together. This entire way of, thinking that Bucky has, or kind of systems thinking, it's all about, or, the olden traditions of Tao Te Ching, Gita, or the Bible, it's all integrated, saying human being is an integrated thing, society is an integrated thing, universe is an integrated thing, your own being, your own soul, your own spirit is an integrated thing. Let's operate integratively, okay? And even an attempt to do that takes you forward. And it's a lot of back and forth, a lot of learning. One other thing I like about what Stephen's entire approach is, he's acknowledging that, look, this is the best thing that I have right now, and I'm building on it, and I'm taking feedback, I am working on it, okay? It's always, all the models are models, they're all maps. They're maps of the territory. We don't have the territory, we have a map, and we're trying to improve the map. And you have to have loyalty to the territory in order to make maps and to use maps. And that is more important than any map. If you get attached to a map, it becomes idle, and it is a substitute from focusing on the territory. So I like this approach of, kind of just openly saying that, look, I'm working on this. This is how I came up with this. And I am working on it myself in order to get feedback, and with others to get the feedback. Next up is going to be Elso, Paul, and Mike. Elso.
Yes, I just want to thank you for making this information so accessible as well. I've been very intimidated by the sciences, and that often happens on a gender basis and other ways in which intimidation can happen. And I just really appreciate the approachability. And I know I'm echoing someone else. And the humanity, it is often lost in science, and with all the politics of research and funding. And I was even thinking about the medical system, which divides people's body organs and doesn't look integratively at who we are and how we function. And so I just really appreciate that reminder, and that this is available to all of us. So thanks.
Thank you. Thank you, El. All right, next up is going to be Paul, Mike, and David. What did you guys get from this meetup? Paul.
Yeah, just like Shrikant is very much into models. I love models too, but I'm even more into human consciousness processes. And with all the Bucky meetups, I haven't been to every single one, but I've been to a lot of them. And I somewhere in me, I feel like it's a bunch of people preaching to the choir, and there's no real deep conversation about how to preach to the non-choir. And your concept of linking the inner work to the outer work is the closest I've seen to that. And I admire that. And I'm excited about it. Because here's like you're going, okay, here's a system whereby a person can learn to think differently. And you got to have that to do the rest. So I admire that a lot. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul. Next up is Mike. Mike, what did you think of this meetup? You got 1 minute.
I don't need a minute. The situation that you said, that we've got another map, another model. We need to create many models. We got models of neuroplasticity. We got models of how Bauhaus and thought and words and language and S.I. Hayakawa all fit together. Plato and DLJ said the map is not the territory. So we need to remember that models are always wrong, but they all are very, very useful, and putting them all together make them even more useful. And you've added tonight, not just you, all the people who talked tonight, except me maybe, added another couple data points on how to put these models together. And I'll remember this forever, and I'm gonna get back into your Substack entry to see if I can get some more. Hopefully you'll share the slides with us.
Thank you. Thank you, Mike. David, what did you get from this meetup?
Thanks, Stephen. Thanks, everyone. So just heading into the week, we can, with Buckminster Fuller, yeah, I think he's a role model. So he definitely put cosmology and actual stuff ahead of like money. So obviously, so that's what I just think about indigenous people and like just obviously contributing to our local community economies and going forward for the week. Obviously, I guess that's what we got to try to do. But
wonderful.
There was a time when Native Americans ruled the land here in America, and they had it a lot simpler in terms of like, like thought, I guess, to my understanding.
Thank you, David. All right, folks. So, Stephen, what did you think of this meetup?
Yes, it was amazing. It was beautiful feedback, beautiful questions. There's such a thoughtfulness in this group, and this is why I'm creating these models, is to be in a relationship with some beautiful souls like this, and we're creating a kind of synergy of our own in these conversations that I'm really loving. So thank you so much. I'm grateful for the opportunity to present these ideas, and to really, this is the first time I've been able to test them within this past year, right? We haven't been getting together as the Design Science Studio, so I present some of these ideas as I go with the World Weavers on a bi-weekly basis, but this has been the first time I've been able to do a full presentation with questions and comments, and this is a real a valuable resource for me.
Wonderful. Well, thank you, everybody. Really appreciate that. Next week, we're going to have Don Brittle back doing the second part of his presentation on his amazing model of the structural theory that he's been working on and its applications. He's going to also show us, hopefully, he's going to show us how to build a structure. So it's going to be kind of show and tell of how to build it. And it's very, very deep concept. Week after that, Kurt McNamara is going to be back, continuing to present chapters of his book. The week after that, it's going to be Stroopy. And then we've got one more meetup that we are trying to schedule. So thank you so much. And if you have suggestions for any presenters for this Buckminster Fuller series, please send me a meetup message or email me at 52livingideas@gmail.com. Okay, would love to get more presenters in. I mean, the way we are seeing it is that, this is a project that was inspired by CJ, and we are trying to, we are committed to doing 2 years of meetups. So at least 100 meetups. It's looking like we'll end up doing 150 of them. And there is a lot of cross-pollination going on during these meetups of people who are deeply into Buckminster Fuller. But, Buckminster Fuller's entire ideas was never about a small group of people. He was always focused on people as such. So this is like an intermediate, you have people at different stages of knowledge. They're coming from very diverse backgrounds, and they're all coming together to learn these ideas. Sometimes a question of somebody who does not know anything about idea is more valuable than people who have been immersed in that, because he's looking at it from an external perspective. And that's what we're getting. It's the issue of kind of multiple perspectives on the same body of thought and same object, which is the universe itself. And so I'm really delighted about how well this is going. This is well beyond what I had hoped for. So thank you, everybody, for both presenting and participating. And we'll see you soon. Bye, everybody.